What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo, and today I'm going to be presenting you with the $30 Lair of Darkness deck profile. This is for someone who maybe is new to the game that you're trying to help welcome them just by buying 3 of the Lair of Darkness structure deck, or maybe it's someone who maybe wants to get back into the game, who just wants to have some fun at locals and doesn't want to spend a lot of money. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the ins and outs of this deck and why I picked certain cards, but you will be able to acquire all the cards in this video for about $30, $10 per deck at your local game store. And I always want to advocate to support your local game store because they're the place that allows you to play all days of the week in local tournaments. And today I'm going to be supporting Project CCG. And if you guys want to get your Lair of Darkness structure decks, you can buy 3 of them from them for $28 shipped directly to you in the US. A little bit more for international, but that's pretty good if you want to save a couple bucks and not make a trip down to your local game store. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So starting off with the main monster lineup, 3 copies of Darkest Diabolos, Lord of the Lair. This is our deck's boss monster, so we obviously want to max out on it. The ability that anytime basically something is tributed, you're able to recur it either from the graveyard or special it out of your hand. It's an incredible boss monster. You know, this isn't like, the best boss monster we've ever seen in a structure deck, but comparably, versus some of the other decks, this one is incredible because it's always going to keep coming back. There's so many ways to trigger the tribute recursion that this deck has. So definitely want to max out on this guy and just put in as much pressure as we can on our opponent. Then we're going to supplement that with 3 copies of Lilith, Lady of Lament. Lilith's a little bit weird in this deck because the trap cards that come with the deck aren't the greatest, but in tandem with the field spell and just being able to be a trigger, I guess, in order to special summon out Diabolos, she's really, really vital to the deck's strategy. That's going to move us on to 3 copies of Arima, the Wicked Warden. So this is basically our pseudo copies of Terraforming, which allow us to get to the field spell a lot quicker, but also the ability to not only draw cards by tributing our monsters, but to be able to essentially Rhoda for any other card in the deck. That's basically, pretty much Arima can almost search every monster in this deck, and that's what makes Arima such a powerful card. So not only being able to trigger Diabolos, but helping tutor out the rest of your deck for whatever the situation calls for, makes Arima a very solid 3 of in this deck. Now for the best new card in this deck, 3 copies of Stygian Street Patrol. This card is actually insane. One of the biggest weaknesses of this deck is that it doesn't have a lot of extenders, and what I mean by that is outside of your normal summon, it's very difficult to do a lot more that doesn't really involve Diabolos, but Stygian Street Patrol allows you to do that because when it's in the graveyard, you can banish it to special summon a fiend monster with 2,000 or less attack from your hand. You may remember this from Infernity decks, but every single card in here that's essentially level 4 or lower can be special summoned off of Stygian Street Patrol. So it gives you a follow-up play if your normal summon gets stopped or maybe your opponent has some sort of disruption. This card allows you to keep playing the game, and that's what I really love about it. You definitely want to max out on this card just in all circumstances when playing a version like this, because this is how you're going to be able to have follow-up plays and really give the deck another level of complexity that it might not have otherwise. So that's it for the 3 ofs. Moving on to the 2 ofs, I'll just go ahead and get these out of the way here. 2 copies of Duke, the Sinister Shadow Lord. I only wanted to run 2 Duke because while its effect in tandem with the field spell is very powerful in effectively being able to kaiju any of your opponent's monsters, what I don't like about Duke is if you don't have the field spell, he's actually rather lackluster because being able to tribute off all your dark monsters just to give him a 500 boost is okay, but it's not the greatest. Now, his recursion ability can actually be rather useful. Some of the cards in this deck, for instance, if you have a Stygian Street Patrol in your graveyard, you can banish the Street Patrol, summon the Duke. Duke's effect will trigger to add something back like maybe Vanity's Fiend. Then you can tribute the Duke to summon Vanity's Fiend, and that's a pretty solid turn 1 play if you're able to set that up. So Duke is like a pseudo extender because it allows you to get resources back, and if it's special summoned, the problem is though you have to basically find a way to already have resources on the board or use something like Street Patrol to help do a play like that. So I don't want to max out on it. It's a good card, but because it's so reliant on the field spell and we don't have as many ways as we might otherwise to get to the field spell, I didn't want to max out on it. Next up is 2 copies of Phantom of Chaos. Phantom of Chaos is really cool because it allows us to copy basically the effects of all the monsters that we have in the graveyard. That means we can get multiple uses out of cards like Arima or Lilith or anything really that whatever the situation calls for. Phantom of Chaos is going to allow us to copy those abilities and get in for whatever we have to. And also it copies the attack value, which is very important because maybe for some of the other cards we're going to be showing later on that will become relevant. So I really like this as a 2 of. It also has 0 defense, so it's recurable through Recurring Nightmare, and overall just a really solid card. Now getting on to the 1-ofs, 1 copy of Tour Guide, it's at 1. The only target is Lilith, but frankly, it's like the only like generic +1 that this deck really has. So, I mean, Tour Guide just into Lilith is pretty good. I mean, that's 2,000 body because Lilith won't be down to 1,000. And it's just, I mean, it's pretty good. There's no reason not to run it. 1 copy of Prometheus. Now, anyone who played during Dad Return format will immediately know where I'm going with this. So Prometheus is basically like your massive finisher in your late game. So Prometheus's effect is you can banish as many dark monsters from your graveyard when he's normal summoned, and he gains 400 attack for each. So you're playing 20 monsters in this deck, so 19 other monsters besides himself, so you're gonna have a lot of stuff loaded into the graveyard. So presumably, if you're like in a top decking scenario, or maybe you need to search this with Arima, you can normal summon this and then banish your entire grave to either get over a big threat or just kill your opponent flat out. Now obviously in Dad Return, Prometheus was also used to modulate your graveyard to summon Dark Armed, but at the same time, it's a nice 1-of. You know, it's basically there since it's searchable through Arima. We don't want to max out on anything more than 1. It's just a nice option to have if the situation calls for it. Then we have 1 Vanity's Fiend. I didn't want to play more than 1 Vanity's Fiend because this deck already has like issues just with consistency, and Vanity's Fiend is a nice card going first, but it is atrocious if you're going second. So I wanted to just have the 1 Vanity's Fiend as an option, kind of for the play I was talking about with Stygian Street Patrol and Duke Shade, but otherwise, you know, you can pitch it for some of your other cards, and it's an alright option, but again, I didn't want the deck to be solely reliant on Vanity's Fiend Turbo, because the other cards in this deck don't exactly augment that strategy very well. So I just like the 1, you know, I don't want to clog the deck with too many tribute summons. We want to have as many playable cards as possible so we can have the most consistent deck going up against our opponents. Last but not least, 1 copy of Legendary Maju Garzette. Very similar to Prometheus, this is kind of like a big finisher. The thing is with this card though, you have to basically tribute all of your monsters you control for this card to summon and just have a massive attack value. It's nice because it's a special summon, so it gives you an extra play, but the issue is it requires you to already be established on the field. So this is just something that you can make that's really big. It also can be recurred through Recurring Nightmare, so it's just another option to have in the deck, but I didn't want to max out on more than 1 because it's a very situational card. It requires you to already have your field set up, which this deck isn't the best at doing, especially in the $30 version, so I like it at 1. So that's it for the monsters. Like I said, I believe it's 20. Moving on to the spells, 3 copies of Lair of Darkness. So I wanted to make the deck as basically consistent as possible without relying on the field spell, because the entire dynamic of this deck shifts whether or not you have Lair of Darkness. This is basically the card that allows you to generate so much advantage through Lilith, through Arima, through all the other cards you basically play in the deck. Lair of Darkness just basically makes your life a hell of a lot easier. However, there are going to be instances where you don't have this card, so I wanted to kind of make the deck as resilient as possible without needing to have it. But if you have Lair of Darkness, your life is going to be way easier, so obviously you want to max out on as many copies as possible. To supplement that, 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. There's no reason we shouldn't be playing this. I mean, we're playing a deck that's 20 dark monsters, so this is going to allow us to just filter through everything we need, and it's not once per turn, so that's pretty busted. To complement that, though, 3 copies of Hand Destruction. Now, there's 2 big problems with this card. The first one is that you're giving your opponent cards so they can sculpt their hand, and that's never a good thing. And the second problem is this card's inherently a -1. You have to use this card, discard 2, so that's a total of 3, and you're only drawing 2 cards, so you're losing 1 card in that exchange. However, there are several cards in this deck that we want in the graveyard that's going to allow us to mitigate that loss. So getting Darkest Diabolos in the graveyard, it doesn't matter because he can be special summoned back, so that's perfectly fine. Stygian Street Patrol is another card we want in the graveyard, which allows us to extend our plays. So Hand Destruction, while it may be a little bit weird, it's just basically a good combo filler and allows us to, again, just have a ton ton of draw power and really help the consistency of the deck, so that way we can get to the cards we want to see, dump the ones out of our hand that we don't want, and allows us to play much more consistently. We have 2 copies of Recurring Nightmare. I believe there's 9 targets in total that this can get. The Lilith, the Rima, the Phantom of Chaos, and the Legendary Maju Garzette. This is another +1, so it's good. You can use like Hand Destruction, pitch 2 0 defense monsters, and bring them both back, so that mitigates the cost too. Just overall really solid card, just helps you recur your resources. Then we have probably the most controversial card in this entire deck, 2 copies of Fires of Doomsday. Now, the best way to describe this is like it's a shitty version of Scapegoat, except for this deck. So the whole reason I'm playing this is because Fires of Doomsday, you special summon 2 tokens, and presumably you're going to use it like Scapegoat. During your opponent's end phase, you're going to flip Fires of Doomsday and give yourself 2 tokens. The reason I like this card, though, is it's kind of like Lair of Darkness without being Lair of Darkness, because you can normal summon Lilith or Arima, and then you can tribute off the tokens, and now you're not losing board presence to get the effects of Lilith or Arima, and maybe bringing back Darkest Diabolos, things like that. So it allows you to do your plays without losing positioning on the board, and I think that's really, really valuable. The worst case scenario, you can set this, and this is going to eat 2 of your opponent's attacks if you're that desperate and you might lose the game, so it might even buy you another turn. So I really like this card. I was really like just kind of figuring out what are the last 2 cards of this deck going to be, but I actually think Fires of Doomsday is a very good card to help push your plays forward and get a lot more damage onto the field that you would have otherwise. So that's it for the spells. I believe there's 13. And moving on to the traps, 3 copies of Mind Crush. This should be a no-brainer. This is like the best trap in this entire box, basically. Your opponent's going to search cards, so you're going to know what's in their hand. You just hit them with Mind Crush. Mind Crush into Mind Crush sometimes just wins games on its own, so there's no reason not to play this card. Probably the best piece of disruption you have in the deck. And then the other weird choice I'm playing 3 copies of Darklight. Now, a lot of you guys might say, Simo, why aren't you playing any of the viruses? And I'm playing 1, and we'll get to that later, but Darklight has basically more targets for its tribute requirement than any other virus card in this deck. I mean, the Crush card, I believe, only has like 5 targets in this deck. Deck Devastation, I think, has like 8, and then Full Force, I think, has like 7. Darklight effectively has like 19 targets. I think the only target that doesn't work with this card is Tour Guide, and Tour Guide fetches Lilith, so technically it still works anyway. But Darklight is interesting because it destroys all special summon monsters during that turn. So you basically set up your board, set Darklight, and then at whatever point you can just tribute off one of your monsters, wipe your opponent's board, and you're in a pretty good position. Now, obviously the virus cards are going to hit your opponent's hand and maybe their next couple of draws. However, the thing is, I'd rather have the more consistent board wipe that I can achieve much more often than a more situational, higher reward type card that I'm not going to be able to pull off as often, because I might not have the right monster for that specific virus card, rather than having Darklight, which basically works with every single card in the deck. So I think this is a really much stronger choice than the viruses. Feel free to disagree, but overall, I think it's a really good choice. Last but not least, we are playing the 1 Eradicator virus because basically this tributing off your Diabolos and just hitting like spells or traps should be game in most instances, and it's at 1 for a reason, so that's why we're playing it. So guys, that's it for the deck profile. I really hope you guys enjoyed this and learned something, and maybe if you want to help out one of your friends by learning or teaching them how to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is a good guide for you. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, and if you found this video helpful, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time. 1, 2, 3.